So hello fellow Earthlings. This is Earthling 6455463728. And I recently saw a podcast by, I think the guy's name is Lex Fridman. He was on Joe Rogan the other day and he was talking to Richard Dawkins. And they started talking about memes as defined by Richard Dawkins, which is supposed to be a unit of cultural like a living cultural unit. And the same way that a gene is something that can be passed along from one entity to another, and it's a unit, let's say, of genetic inheritance. A meme is something like that as well. It's a cultural idea, I guess, that can be passed from person to person. So a meme is basically something that lives in our brains and it can get transmitted from one brain to the next. And I presume it's kind of like a habit, an idea, a philosophy, something like that, that can infect, spawn, and basically stay in a mind. And as they were talking, two things jumped out at me. One was that I guess racism is a meme, especially the racism that is most prevalent, the hierarchy of races, which is to say that maybe Asians are the most intelligent, but still white people should be on top, and below that, what other races are there? There's Native Americans, they're below both of those, I suppose, and I mean of North and South America, and they might still be above black people. So yeah, I guess that hierarchy, that belief system, I think, that has infected so many billions of minds on our planet, even the ones that think they don't believe it, because I think that is one of the attributes of a meme, is that it doesn't have to be conscious. It can just be, because we have two methods of thinking. We have our habitual method or reflex thinking. That's thinking fast and thinking slow. So when we think fast, we don't really think per se. It's just a reaction. And I think that's where racism can live, in people who don't want to be racist necessarily. And of course, beyond that, I think it can also live in the slow thinking that we do on an everyday basis as well. So that was, is that one of the first things that struck me? I guess, yeah. The second thing that struck me was that Mr. Fridman asked Mr. Dawkins, he said, do you think we'll ever come to a time where religion doesn't exist? And I was shocked that they didn't. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, in answering some of Lex Fridman's questions, Richard Dawkins gave to me some really interesting answers. Answers that I felt were good answers, better than I could have done. And but at the same time, I was surprised that neither of them realized, I guess they didn't bother to define what a meme was, that religion is a meme. I mean, maybe it's a very large genetic unit, with all of the different, like, let's say if you want to go with Christianity, but at the same time, all religions look to, every religious people meet an atheist, I think they all, even though they are atheistic about all religions except their own, they find some kind of camaraderie in the idea that at least we believe in the supernatural. And I think that basic unit is something that, I don't see how that dies. So I was surprised that Lex asked Richard about that, because to me, if you don't know how to get rid of these memes, is the meme going to kill itself? Why would there ever be a time where it is not being transmitted from one person to the next with words? I don't think there would ever be a time that religion would end, because there is no vaccination process for any ideas, really. There's no vaccination product for racism, so I expect racism to, because I think that's the next thing about memes, and that was something that they discussed as well. They don't have to be true. They don't have to be based on facts. These memes, these ideas, they exist for the sake of existing. And this is something that they did talk about. They spoke about the fact that, let's say, there's no benefit to peacock's feathers. And there was one point, I think, where Lex was asking Richard, he was saying, what do you think about some of these ideas that if something is passed on, that means it has a beneficial effect? And I think he mentioned two things, which is that Darwin believed that genes did not have to have a sexual, there was a sexual selection that was completely separate from a fitness selection. So just because, a particular trait might arise and females or males of the species might decide that, yeah, that's attractive, and that might have no survival benefit, but it might can be propagated throughout the species by members with that particular attribute surviving more, because there's just more females that like it, and they are able to survive through other means, or more males like it and they're able to survive with other means. But and at the same time, you were saying that it can go both ways, that it can be that a sexually attractive attribute can have a survival benefit, and it just as easily can be that there is none whatsoever. It's just something that members of the opposite sex like, for whatever reason. I think there was a word for it, a word that was it spiracles, something like that. Basically, if you look at an arc, if you look at arcs that are next to each other, like in cathedrals, there are these things that are at the top of the arc that are between the peaks of each arc, and I think they're called spiracles. And someone might say, well, look at those spaces between the peaks of each of those arcs, those spiracles, maybe they must have some kind of benefit to them. And spanicles, I can't remember, but there isn't. They just exist as a byproduct of arcs. And I think that's an interesting idea. That said, as we're talking about, the benefits, I don't know that racism has to have any benefits, and I don't know that religion has to have any benefits either. Some of the things, I guess, that we have found as time passed, I remember looking at a particular video. I wish I could remember the name of this guy. It was so interesting. I think it was at Stanford. He had like 26 lectures that I listened to. And the idea was that spandrels, that's what they're called, spandrels. And they have no, if you look at them, spandrels are a word, I guess, that would be used to show that, hey, everything isn't a survival benefit. It's just a byproduct of, or a feature of something that is has a survival benefit, you know. But anyway, with respect to genes, one of the things that has been discovered and that I learned from reading this, looking at Stanford's course, was that there are long segments, apparently, of non-coding DNA. So, for example, human beings have supposedly a very surprisingly low number of genes that actually code for proteins. And one of the things that we were really surprised to find that out. And what we realized is that there are long segments of genetic material that do not code for anything. And for a long time, especially when I was growing up, we would hear about this garbage DNA. This DNA it wasn't doing anything, it wasn't good for anything. It was just junk. And that's another word. It was called junk DNA. And we were like, okay, well, maybe this is just DNA that's just existing. It has no real purpose. But one of the things that has been discovered is that this supposedly junk DNA is the software. It's basically how to use the genes that code for things. So as it turns out, it's not DNA that exists for the sake of existing, and it's just, oh yeah, I want to exist, so just add me to the next generation too. And it isn't like that. It's like, okay, you have a number of tools. Maybe you have 3, you have 4, you have however many different tools. But in order to make things, you need to know when to use what tool. And that's what the quote-unquote junk DNA is for. It says when to make this protein, how much of the protein to make, when to block a particular gene from making things. Let's say, you aren't 5 years old anymore, so you need to stop making a particular thing or start making a particular hormone. It's the programming that allows things to happen when. To say, okay, we're making more of this hormone because this kid has to be an adolescent. Okay, so we're in a warm environment, so we need to start sweating more often. Or, we're in a cool environment, or any number of things like that. So it's pretty interesting, that it's not just all about the genes. So I wish someone, maybe people have expanded on the idea of a meme. Maybe there's non-coding memes. But to me, if I take racism and religion as genes, they seem to be of this junk DNA. Well, not junk DNA, because they aren't like, that's non-coding. It's not the same thing. But it seems to be, well, actually, yeah, coding or DNA for the sake of itself. That's what racism and religion seem to be. Memes that exist for the sake of themselves. Maybe there are benefits to them, real scientific hardcore benefits, and not like morality or something like that, because you don't need morality to come from religion. It can come on its own. I think they've shown it in many instances before, but I wish there was more of that. But anyway, it was a good conversation with Mr. Dawkins, and hopefully we can see more at some point. I'm glad he's still alive. I don't know if it was him or somebody else who had cancer. I actually need to Google that. Anyway, you can wish me luck. You can like or unlike. You can comment, subscribe, and or share. Peace.